And viewers, yesterday came the big announcement from the government in terms of change in the vaccine policy. The change that said that we are now going to open it up to everybody above the age of 18. The change that we are now going to decentralize it. We're now going to enable states, private entities to directly buy the vaccines from the manufacturers. Apart from that, the government has now cleared 4,500 crore rupees for Serum and Bharat Biotech to ramp up their production. They've also brought in changes to their policy so that more and more foreign vaccines can be brought into our country at a faster pace and sold to people here, essentially opening up the vaccination drive as much as possible. And now, we told you last night that it's not going to be as if starting 1st May, all of us can simply queue up or land up at a pharmaceutical shop, buy a vaccine and get our shot. It won't be that easy and simple. And the biggest constraint there is going to be the supply of doses. We are ready on every other front. We are ready with people who are willing to buy and pay for it. We are ready with people who are willing to stand in hours in a queue to get their vaccine shot. We're ready with the infrastructure, with private hospitals and government hospitals and their medical staff all prepared. What we don't know and do have a big challenge with is the supply concern. So tonight we're going to talk about it, and I want to start off by giving you an insight into what Miranow's own team has brought out from the numbers and done a deep dive into these vaccination numbers. Now, 1st of April, if you remember, viewers, is when we open it up to everybody above the age of 45. If you look at as we began to pick up pace and all of the states began to vaccinate everybody above the age of 45, we kept saying that the target is 50 lakh vaccinations per day, and that would be an awesome vaccination speed to have. But for April 6 to 12, we actually managed to have an average daily vaccination dose of about 36 lakh 31,000. On an average between April 6 and 12, every day we gave these many vaccination doses across the country. The same dropped to 26 lakh 56,000. A drop of almost 10 lakh doses every day on a nationwide basis. A drop of almost 24% in a week's time when it comes to your average doses being administered. Now, I just want to remind you that this was the time, the changeover from this week to the next week was the time when a lot of states started talking about vaccine doses shortage, when a lot of states started saying that they don't have, when states like Maharashtra and Chhattisgarh said we've run out of vaccines and started shutting down centers. From Noida and Ghaziabad, we saw a shutdown in centers. Odisha raised an alarm, Rajasthan raised an alarm, several of the states raised an alarm. Others reported shutting down of centers, never officially said it, perhaps because they were BJP governed states, but the problem was real. This is what the numbers now tell us. If you look at Maharashtra, even in the state of Maharashtra, the vaccination speed dramatically went down. So in Maharashtra, in fact, if we see, it went down by 11% in that week. April 6 to 12, we vaccinated roughly about 3.4 lakh people every day. In April 13 to 19, we did about 3 lakh people every day. Massive falls were seen in Chhattisgarh, where the vaccination pace dropped by half, by over 50%. West Bengal, the vaccination pace dropped again. As elections picked up pace, vaccination speed dropped. Rajasthan, again a state that we are facing shortage. We don't have enough. The vaccination pace went from 3.75 lakh to 1.8 lakh, down by 51%. Gujarat, it saw a drop of 37%. Madhya Pradesh, it saw a drop of 29%. Uttar Pradesh saw a drop of 28%. Karnataka saw a drop of 28.26%. The only state, or one of the big states that actually saw an increase in or a faster vaccination pace was actually Tamil Nadu. But that's because Tamil Nadu finished its elections on 6th of April and then finally said, okay, now let's get down to business. Let's start focusing on other things. If this is the scenario, what happens next? How do we increase our supply? That's the big question. Malini Asola, co-convener for All India Drug Action Network, joins us. Dr. N.K. Arora, Executive Director for INCLIN and Chairman for the COVID-19 Working Group, joins us this evening. Divya Rajgopal, Senior Assistant Editor with Economic Times, joins us. Dr. Vishnu Panigrai, Group Head for Medical Strategy and Operations, joins us. And Dr. Shashank Joshi, Dean, Indian College of Physicians, Leelavati Hospital, also joins us, member of the Maharashtra Task Force. Let me start off with Dr. Joshi. Dr. Shashank Joshi, to what would you attribute this drop in the vaccination pace? Can we say that people were stepping out in lower numbers because of COVID? Can we say it's because many centers were running low, or states consciously slowed down the pace because they would have run out of the stock? Okay, let me see if I can take that question. Let me see if I can take that question across to Mr. N.K. Arora. Good evening. Can you hear me, Mr. Arora?
Yes, thank you very much, Tanvi. Yeah, please go ahead. So, are you asking the question, the reasons for drop in the vaccination?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Hello? Tanvi, can you hear me?
Yes, Dr. Arora, that's the question.
Yes. So, as you are very rightly indicating, there are several reasons. Vaccine shortage is one of them. Vaccine management at the state level. Third is the local events which are taking place, like the religious gatherings or political activities going on. I think it's a combination, but it's quite surprising that some of the states are showing a drop of 50% or more, and that is very worrisome. That what could be the reason for that? And if it is shortage, one is really worried about that. Over.
Okay, it's interesting that you say that. So one of the cases, and it could be shortage, and then it becomes a very worrying trend. And I asked you this question, Mr. Arora, before I go to other panelists, because when we were looking to open it up to everybody above the age of 45, we said we were looking to clock 50 lakh vaccinations per day. Now that you and I sit here today and talk about vaccinating everybody above the age of 18, there is a lot of euphoria around it, which is why I am asking you this question. Will we be able to even touch those numbers, or will it be as low as it is right now?
So I think yesterday's announcements have to be interpreted properly, and today Honorable Prime Minister also has said, but not in as many words. And that is that there are two parts to yesterday's announcement. One is that the priority group, more than 45 years, that immunization will continue as before, and center is going to continue to support that. As far as the other age groups are concerned, and other from 18 to 45, whomsoever, that now states will have to decide, and up to 50% of the manufacturer supply, they can take it and use it the way they would like it. Now, this has to be seen in the context of last week's announcement. Number one, that Sputnik has been given uh, uh, emergency use authorization. In addition, various other foreign vaccines will be allowed inside the country, and it is not a prerequisite they first finish the bridging trial and then give the. So while bridging trial will start concomitantly, those vaccines can come into the country. So I think it will be about 4 to 6 weeks before the supply situation eases up, where individuals less than 45 years can also be immunized. But at least in principle, the states can decide, depending on the availability they can have, to immunize various individuals less than 45 years.
Okay, 4 to 6 weeks is what you're saying, Dr. Arora. While some may say it's a little conservative, I hope by then we are able to fix the supply side issues. Let me actually also bring in Divya Rajgopal on this. Divya, the math that we know so far, 6 to 6.5 crore is what Serum is manufacturing. They will only be able to step it up by June. Bharat Biotech today came out with a press release saying they're going to be producing 1.2 crore, 1.5 crore vaccines. But I mean, that doesn't happen overnight either. And Sputnik will also take a few weeks before they can import some vaccines. So what's your own sense about when will we actually see more options and more doses in the market?
I think, Tanvi, we need to temper our expectations. Even though the vaccination has opened up for everybody about the age of 18, I don't think the vaccine supply is coming in anytime before end of June. So that is something that we need to be very prepared for. There is going to be rush. People are coming for their second dose of vaccines. The people who took the people in high risk groups who took the vaccine in Jan, Feb, they will be coming up for their second dose of vaccines. They need to be prioritized first. So not before end of June, I think the vaccine supply is going to improve. But that also, if you look at, I mean, a rough calculation which even I have done, it looks like we will have 200 million doses, which is still not enough, but at least it will be better than what we are right now.
Okay, so 200 million doses still not enough, but we know what we may be looking at. Interesting that you put across that number as well. And I want to talk about some of the other options that we have, some of the other vaccines that could come in. But again, that's also something that doesn't happen before the month of June. Milani Asola, what about the other steps that the government has taken in terms of opening up the vaccination drive, saying that you can tie up with institutes like Hafkin, giving money to the existing manufacturers to ramp up their facilities. Several of the manufacturers that Sputnik is looking to tie up with. Together, can we look at ramping at this up sooner than the month of June? Or should we assume till the month of June, no additional supply is actually coming in?
So, Tanvi, the government appears to have really washed its hands off the primary responsibility of vaccination. And practically now with this policy, it is permitting a free for all. There are lots of elements to this policy, but primarily I would say there are two concerns related to supplies and pricing. Currently, as others have, and you have spoken just now about the current shortages in supplies, there's a question about whether the government should not have opened up a little more gradually. Vaccination of the priority groups is not completed, and while government has taken steps to expand manufacturing, these are not going to kick in for a few more months. We've also, already discussed about how the supplies from Serum and Bharat are probably not going to stabilize before June, and neither are some of the new vaccines that are expected coming in for a few more weeks. And when it comes to now bringing in the public sector units and some of the other private companies where there is a discussion of expansion, again, that is very late in the game. And here, even though now credit line has also been extended to both Serum and Bharat, there's also a question of why this is only going to two companies and why the government had not tried to expand capacity and bring in more companies to manufacture vaccines earlier. Secondly, I'll just talk a little bit about pricing, because the government does not seem to have learned anything from what is taking place right now in the case of remdesivir, tocilizumab, and previously many other COVID products, including masks. So where, of course, the government has taken a very passive approach. The policy is not putting any checks in place on the price, so we can assume that there is going to be a big difference in the government price and the private price. And combine that now with the short supplies, there is a real risk of black marketing, of overpricing, diversion from the government supply, all of the problems that we're currently seeing with some of the COVID drugs. It also raises questions, of course, about equity, because vaccine outside of the priority groups will only be accessible to those who can afford to pay. I can also raise many other issues, if you like. For example, the government had promised that they were not going to open private sale for vaccines while the vaccines were on a restricted emergency use approval, but that seems to have changed. We would also like to know what are the data for these vaccines and why they are not being shared transparently. If Bharat Biotech's phase 3 trial, where it stands, what is the status? The data from Serum and Dr. Reddy's bridging trials also have not been shared. There are questions about the efficacy of these vaccines against the new variants. And then I would also talk a little bit about the capacity of the government in terms of doing monitoring of adverse events following vaccination. Because in this respect, the National Committee or AEFI committee is lagging badly on investigating the several adverse events that have already been reported. And there are many issues that have come to light regarding underreporting and lapses in investigation. Also, in light of these rare adverse events that are possibly causally linked to Covishield and the AstraZeneca vaccine. And now these have been recognized by regulators in Europe, and the WHO has also put out a statement. We're wondering why the government is not putting out a safety warning immediately and asking Serum to update its fact sheet. And then maybe last, I would just...
some of the interesting points that you've raised. One of the points... Yes, if I can just take one of the points that you raised to Mr. N.K. Arora and ask him this question, Mr. Arora. Okay, so we know what the production capacity is for Serum, how much of it is coming in. We also know that the central government will need to factor in some stock so that people who are lining up for their first dose and those who are eligible, above the age of 45, that the center has to vaccinate, there is enough stock for them. Now, what are our other options then? How soon do you think Sputnik will be able to bring in large numbers? If we don't have the kind of cold storage that some of the other vaccines need, will we see Pfizer or a Moderna coming into our country? If Johnson & Johnson was an option, but they've run into trouble in the United States, should we even bank upon that?
So you have asked 2 or 3 questions. One is that the Sputnik, I think somewhere around first or second week of May, as I understand, it should be available. The second is that although Johnson & Johnson has run into difficulty in USA, but one has to see, because I understand they have asked for doing a bridging trial in India, because every ethnic group does not have the same degree of adverse events as Malini was suggesting. Third, the storage issues. So the country is well equipped for -20 storage and transport, because we have established that the storage line for vaccine like polio. Polio requires -20 before it is taken out and administered to the children. So -20 can be handled very well. So Moderna is there. And I now understand that even Pfizer has come out with the version which is stored at -20. The question is whether Moderna and Pfizer will be able to give us the vaccine. They are already overcommitted, as we know. I'm associated with COVAX facility also, and Pfizer has not been able to fulfill its commitment in COVAX as well. So I do not know to what extent we will be able to get it, but Johnson & Johnson is there, and I think we will have to start looking for other options. And one of them was the Russian vaccine. Over.
Okay, so these are some of the options that we can look at, and of course J&J may have had trouble in US, which is why if in our country we have to look at it, we look at it from the point of view of a bridge trial that they conduct to see how it works on people in our country. So those are the some of the options that we can look at. Let me also say good evening to Vishnu, who's joining us on this conversation right now. Vishnu, people are still trying to understand what yesterday's announcement really means for us in the short term. It may be great news for us by July or August, but can we really get a vaccine shot before that? What changes post 1st of May?
See, the first thing that has happened is that yesterday's announcement that anyone above 18 will now be eligible for vaccination. And if you just look at the way things have evolved over the last couple of months, one of the reasons of this spread also is the super spreaders, we call it, this young population who are mobile, and many of them are asymptomatic but positive, who have spread it to their relatives, their elderly relatives, parents. And this, and plus this is a very working class population, whether it is in the cities or in the towns or in the factories. So they need to be protected well. And at the same time, the vaccine ramp up has started. And I don't want to be a doomsday sayer here. If you look at it within such a short time, we have done around 130 million people have been vaccinated across the country since 16th of January, whereas the first world country, which is the most developed country, USA, they have just barely crossed 200 million. So agree on the percentage of the population, the amount that we have vaccinated is pretty low, but we have gone far ahead, and I think so. The vaccination ramp up that is happening, the financial incentives that the government has now given to Serum Institute and Bharat Biotech, Sputnik coming in, and then giving approval for all the WHO and EU, Europe, Japan approved vaccines, USA approved vaccines, that will open up the door. And the other thing that has come out of yesterday's announcement is that 50% of it will go to the government, and government will distribute it the way they are doing. And 50% will be in the open. Open means state governments, the private sector, they can approach the manufacturers directly. And prior to that, that's a very important thing, is that the respected manufacturers, they have to give the price before that. So that is the price that they will set. And so whether it's the state government or the private healthcare providers, they know what is the price they're looking at, and they can accordingly book in their amount of vaccines that they want to take. So this will help going forward. I don't say that on 1st May we will have a huge lot of vaccines that everyone can go ahead, but at least the road has been now set, and the journey will start. I think so. Let us be positive about it. And I think there's too much of negativity. I want to be very clear on this. That let us be proud that we are the vaccine global manufacturing hub as far as vaccines are concerned, and Indian vaccines are good. And if you look at one of the reasons for this vaccine hesitancy, is that we ourselves have sown the seeds of doubt way back in January and February when it started, whether this is good or that is bad. So, I think that has also created a problem. So all this put together, and but at the same time, I would like to commend the electronic media and the print media for putting up that vaccination has to happen. We have to universalize it. I think so. One of the reasons of this first May announcement is because of the pitch given by the electronic media, the print media, the public to vaccination into this age group that was left behind. And let us take it in that spirit.
Okay, now, so since you mentioned that, let me also tell our viewers that India's daily COVID vaccines that are being administered per 100 people is 72% lower than the average of other countries, other countries like United States, Canada, Germany, Italy. And some of these are the worst hit countries. US was one of those countries, so was Italy. Again, India's share of people who've received at least one dose of COVID vaccine is 99.26%, lower than the average for US, Canada, Germany, and Italy. So while yes, we have vaccinated a large number of people, we need to understand that for this to work, and for herd immunity to kick in, and for more people to be protected, so that we can go about to slightly easier living lives, we need to vaccinate a higher percentage of people. Otherwise, it doesn't function. Let me see if Dr. Shashank Joshi can hear me right now, and he's with us. Dr. Joshi, good evening.
Good evening. I can hear you loud and clear.
Dr. Joshi, before we move on to a larger conversation of addressing the vaccine supply issue, I wanted to check with you. We did some data mining about vaccination pace on a daily average basis in the month of April, and we've seen that from the week 5th to 12th and the week following that, there has been a drop of 24% in the vaccination pace. Now, could you shed any light on what could be possibly the biggest reason for this?
Probably, I would give three reasons for this. First one is definitely some places and some geographies, there was genuine shortages. In many places, there are still shortages. But that's not the primary reason. Secondly, the second wave has hit us hard, and people have started staying home and they're scared to go to get vaccinated. So that's the second reason. And in many geographies, there are restrictions in place. And very much the same places which are vaccinating are also the same places which are the COVID care centers. So some degree of hesitancy again crept back. So that is there. So I think these are probably the reasons. But I'm very certain that it will pick up again. And actually more people want to get vaccinated as long as it is available 24/7. And as long as we will be able to do some innovative strategies to expand it. But these are my three reasons for the probable drop which might have occurred in this week.
Then why, Dr. Joshi, are you so confident that it will pick up pace? I don't think that the COVID pandemic situation is easing anytime soon, be it Maharashtra or Uttar Pradesh.
I think there are two things. I think there will be a better supply, and I think there will be better methods which will be adopted in general, because there is a lot of now local empowerment being given, and probably that is why probably there will be definitely an improvement. I also feel the Prime Minister's speech today will be an impetus, because remember the fourth pillar in COVID appropriate behavior beyond masking, distancing and sanitization is the vaccine. And I think the earlier we vaccinate, the better it is. At least the vulnerable group and the working class group. These are the two targeted populations which need vaccination at the earliest. The vulnerable group, COVID frontline warriors and healthcare workers, to a reasonable extent have got vaccinated. But I would still appeal to them to complete that. And in the meanwhile, also a large working class, which also will now get covered in the new ambit from 1st of May, will also get covered. Also, the other reason I feel is more options will be available. Probably in the next 4 weeks, we will have 2 more vaccines. One is already likely to come, which is the Sputnik. In all probability, we will have Zydus coming up in another 15 days to a month. And probably in another month and a half, we will have 2 more options available. So with the number of vaccine manufacturers ramping up their pace, I reasonably feel confident that the vaccination drive will restart and re-kick again, and with a lot of impetus and positivity, because we need to dent the third wave. And vaccines will clearly be impactful to denting the third wave. Probably this wave, we are already into the wave. We, in many parts of India, are already in the peak of that wave. And therefore, it is definitely mandatory to vaccinate these targeted populations at the earliest.
Okay. Dr. Panigrahi, before I go back to Divya, I wanted to ask you this question. 50% of the vaccine doses, the makers can now sell them directly to state governments and even to private hospitals or industrial establishments. Now, how do you see this playing out? Will we still largely see the role of states, or will we actually see individual, private, large groups directly getting into negotiations and buying off in bulk and selling them in the open market?
No, I don't think the open market thing will happen. It will be, because this will be regulated. You have to go on to the COVIN, who will, has to get it. Everything will be accountable. So, and the private players, if you look at it over the last 1 year, they have played a very big role in containing this pandemic, helping out the government, helping out the public. They have been an equal partner in it, rather more than equal, if I can put it that way. So please, let's not say that they'll go out and sell it to the public. And it will be a mixed hybrid, I think. The state governments also will buy, the private sector also will buy. And with the ramp up that is happening in the vaccination manufacturing, things will improve. The other thing that people have not noticed is that we were short of some of the products that go into the vaccine manufacturing, which is to be sourced from USA. And there was a ban on this. The government has now put in, and at the back end, so that is opening up. So our ramp up will be facilitated that way. We had a bottleneck there, if you recollect, which was happening till a short while back.
Yes, but there's been a bit of a back and forth on that. According to Adar Poonawalla, that was largely for the vaccine that is still being manufactured, which is Novavax or Covovax as it's otherwise known as. But that has become a big issue, Divya. And just, I believe yesterday again, there was a comment from the US President's team saying that they're currently not looking at lifting that embargo on raw material exports. So United States continues to sit on the raw materials that it perhaps would have helped Serum manufacture some more vaccines.
Those raw materials are stuck, but these things also should have been planned better, because why are we getting to know about these stuck raw materials today? Because this whole act which the US has implemented, this was enacted almost a year ago. So it was not that this was known just few months back that we're going to have a shortage. So I mean, this is something which we should ask Serum Institute also, that how come they did not anticipate that these kind of raw materials will be blocked? Because this Defense Production Act was implemented by Donald Trump, and it has been continued by the Biden administration. So I don't see why are they surprised all of a sudden that they're not getting these raw materials. On the other side, I think there is one point which I want to bring in about the whole vaccine. Should it be priced? How it's going to be supplied in private market? And one thing which you're forgetting is that vaccines are supposed to be public goods. They're supposed to be something which people should get for free. And India is perhaps the only country that is actually charging money for vaccines. You look at United States, which is the capitalist country in the world, is giving out vaccines for free. But because India did not do pre-purchase agreement with vaccine makers, it's funding the companies now after almost a year ago. Even though companies kept telling the government that they need funding almost a year back, we would not be in the situation where we would be scrambling whether it should be private market, public market, state government. We had enough time to plan about our vaccine doses, administration, and manufacturing capacity. If this was the case a year ago, we could have said that the government was unprepared. But almost a year back, the government seems to be now acting in panic, where they are under pressure to fund companies. So ideally, we should not be paying for vaccines, but we are in a situation because the government decided not to fund the vaccines almost a year ago. Most companies have put in money from their own risk capital, and if they want to take it back from charging through the private market, we shouldn't object, because otherwise we will never have new vaccines coming in if the government doesn't set up, or it doesn't allow companies to make profits over their vaccines.
Yes, and I think that is something that even the manufacturers have actually been indicating, to say that they also need funding, they also need money at some point. I remember Adar Poonawalla in many different ways has actually said it in his last series of interviews, to say, well, we're ready and we are more than willing to participate in this and help the government out, but at some point we will also have to, start selling it at other avenues so that we can make some money. In fact, before I move on, Divya, you mentioned that this is something that the government should have responded earlier to, or Serum should have raised earlier. Similarly, the money that is being sanctioned off right now, I mean, I'm just wondering, why is it that the government decided now that 4,500 crore must be given to Bharat Biotech and Serum, and not 4 months ago when the initial round of approvals came in?
Right now, the government is under pressure. I guess it seems like, and of course, it looks like that the companies have said that if there is no risk capital coming from government, they will perhaps not be able to manufacture, because the government has effectively restricted exports, and there is really no way that it is planning to kind of purchase also. It didn't have this indication. So companies have, in a way, putting a gun to the government's head and saying that, you know what, you need to start funding the risk capital, otherwise we might not be able to manufacture. So that's perhaps seems to be the awakening that has come in with the government, and I think Mr. N.K. Arora would perhaps have more details on why did the government decide to start funding now and not a year ago. But it looks like this is the case, that finally companies seems to have said that enough is enough. We need to have some support from the government, otherwise we won't be able to manufacture the vaccines.
Okay, fair enough. Let me ask that question to Dr. N.K. Arora and try and get an insight, Dr. Arora. Many of these decisions that are coming in right now, was there a thought process initially that we should just push the make in India ones in that limited setup? Why didn't we look at ramping it up earlier, or were we banking on the other vaccines? And if that was the case, why is it that we are now looking at giving these funds? I'm just simply trying to understand. You've given some amount of funds to these two companies, 4,500 crore at that. They will take time to now ramp up their production capacity. It won't happen overnight. So why couldn't it have been done sooner?
So, Department of Biotechnology brought out a RFA, and the last date was 31st March 2020, for asking for application for support to vaccine developers and manufacturers. And 1st April, we reviewed the applications, and from there started. So it is not that the government has, government probably did not want to put all eggs in one basket. And that is why we have a menu of vaccines today, whether it is Cadila, I'm not mentioning either Covaxin or, so there are at least 30 candidates which are part of the support provided by the government. So government has been working on two fronts. It is now they were ready because AstraZeneca supported Serum Institute at that time, but we know Covaxin was completely supported by ICMR, both technically and financially at that time. So in hindsight, many times it looks simpler, but Government of India probably first time has put in huge amount of money. I'm not privy to that, but it's a substantial amount of money for both R&D and for getting technology and developing the product here. And that's why we have a DNA vaccine. That is why we have a RNA vaccine coming. That's why we have 2 or 3 recombinant antigen-based proteins. And there are several other similar kind of products going to come. So by the end of this year, we should have 7 or 8 products in the market. So there has been, I think for the first time I saw such a
Quickly,
huge
before we wrap this up, Malini, last word to you.
Sorry?
Yes.
I didn't get
Yes.
you.
Yes, Mr. Arora, I got your points. I just wanted to quickly bring in Malini for her last comment on what needs to be watched out for in terms of ironing out the supply side issues and ensuring a smooth sailing, if not from 1st May, at least from 1st June or 15 June. Malini.
So, Tanvi, the policy has really been done this time to appease the many voices that were criticizing the slow rollout, and also with an objective of attracting some of the foreign vaccines that we know are going to be sold if they come into India at very high prices. I do agree with Divya on the point that the companies are at the moment, they have arm twisted the government into providing this funding, but not on the other points of hers. I think that at the moment, even Serum's demand for 3,000 crore is quite outrageous, and this is also representing something slightly different in terms of the government support. So traditionally, the government has not really supported capital investments, and this really is a sea change. And I think this is also what Dr. Arora was referring to. The companies are now actually, both Bharat and Serum will be using this credit line to be investing in their future capacity. And I think there should be a little more information about why they require these very, very large sums of money. I don't agree that the stockpiling of Serum was done at its own risk. It was completely de-risked by grants that had received from foreign agencies as well as pre-orders from other governments. But I'll leave it at that. I will just want to make 2 more points. I think there was a comment about India being a global manufacturer of vaccines. But with this policy, again, there is a question of whether the exports have been halted indefinitely, and therefore, what is the responsibility towards the global community? And then also in terms of the state government procuring, it appears to be a policy that would be pitting state governments against the private market and also against each other. So there could be disparities in terms of the price and the supplies that the state procurement, different states would be able to procure vaccines at. And finally, in terms of private sector involvement, yes, it's true that there has been a lot of private sector involvement during the COVID pandemic. And while that is much appreciated, that has also come at a cost. And the hallmark of that involvement has been exploitation. So I think we do have to watch out for how these vaccines are going to be rolled out, particularly in the private sector.
Okay, fair enough. We will, and we are still awaiting more details of how each of the states are going to plan it, what the vaccine manufacturers are thinking, what is the kind of pricing that they are going to look at. The vaccine manufacturers will have to announce the pricing in advance before they can actually strike these contracts with others. Completely out of time. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for joining us on this conversation. Few of the things that I just want to lay it out on the table for our viewers as we wrap up this conversation. There is a big constraint on the supply of vaccine doses. Series of the steps that have been taken by the government in the last few days also indicates the government now acknowledging and realizing that there is a shortage on the vaccine doses front, which is why we need to do more to ramp up our vaccination drive. It's significantly slowed down. Post 1st April, the idea was to vaccinate 40 lakh, 50 lakh people every day, but we don't have the doses. There is a lot of fear amongst people as well in terms of stepping out during COVID times, and that's drastically brought our speed down to just 25, 26 lakh vaccine doses being administered every day. Add to that the fact that any amount of new addition from other players outside of Serum or Bharat Biotech can perhaps only start from mid-May and June. So Sputnik vaccine should only be in market from mid-May or maybe May end. Serum Institute will only be able to step up from June. Any other fresh ones that come in and seek emergency approval, even though the process has been made faster, will still see several weeks before these vaccines can make it into the market. So yes, starting 1st of May, the vaccine makers are free to sell half of this stock to non-central government entities. But really, where is the stock and how much of that stock will actually then be given to anybody below the age of 45? There is a big